I think people don't understand how I think when people say hormones, they immediately think sex hormones. And
Yes.
so, like, I'm feeling hormonal. That doesn't mean that you're feeling insulin sensitive. So the dance between the hormones, so what Jen said about the adrenals, and even cortisol and where you deposit fat, all these different things, there's a dance between them. Like with birth control pills, you're in a state of almost pregnancy the whole time without being pregnant because you've stopped your menstrual cycle. And so, the whole system is complicated in a good way. It's a feedback loop where everything is kind of leaning on this house of cards. And when it's going well, it just is like magic.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn Trepeck, your host and health coach, here with you every week, as always, for wellness without the weirdness. And joining me today is Christine. Christine, welcome back.
Great to be back, Jen. It's been a little while.
It has been a little while. So we have a few new listeners, so a little background. Christine is an acupuncturist. She was actually our first ever guest interview back in 2019. And then, of course, over the years, we've done quite a few episodes together because Christine and I are colleagues, to say the least. We co-led monthly wellness webinars for years. They were in person before they were webinars during the pandemic. And then, we're co-founders and creators of the No method of integrative care for chronic pain. So Christine and I work together a lot. And I wanted to ask you, Christine, to join me for this episode, not just so that our listeners have even more brain power and insights, but also because, not to out you, but we are on different sides of the menopause transition.
Yes, no revelations. I think it's pretty obvious. At the age of 73, I would hope so.
Right. So I'm in perimenopause. You are, as you just said, 73. I'll be 42 in September for people. So, I think today's all about answering questions from women over 40. And the questions run the gamut. I mean, I think I have about 15 questions here. Lots on hormones and nutrition, energy, brain fog, sleep, even some skincare. So stick with us as we, make our way through the internet's questions from women over 40. Christine, what do you think?
I think it's good. It's comprehensive. It's a topic I haven't sort of delved into recently. So I was glad for, the review, and I'm excited to share some of the information that I think the audience is really going to enjoy.
Good. Yes. All right. So before we get to the first question in a sec, we have to tell our members what they're getting this week. So members, so many goodies coming your way this week. Okay. So first, your recipe is perfect for any gathering. If you need to bring something, it might also become like a staple of your own table this summer. It's for zucchini noodle caprese. It's everything, like every ingredient, I guess maybe other than the mozzarella, is seasonal. So it's going to taste amazing. This is a great one you can make, especially if you have a farmer's market near you. Perfect for this time of year. Okay, then I'm also sending you an article from a past guest and friend of the pod, Dr. John Neustadt. The title of the article is Top Natural Ways to Maintain Strong Bones. Because while that wasn't as much a question that came from the internet, it is a question that I'm getting from this demographic, women over 40, recently in person. So that article is coming your way. And I've been saying it all month. It's time for your live Q&A, which is a one-on-one, just you and me. So I've loved the conversations that we've had so far. If you haven't snagged a time, do it this week. This is your last chance for the quarter. So if you want this recipe or the article delivered to your inbox or a one-on-one mini health coaching session, be sure you're a member. Go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries for just $10 a month. You get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions. It's a total deal. I say it all the time. It's a steal when you take advantage of the full offerings because you save far more than that $10 cost. It's a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community so we can continue to bring you new episodes and experts every single week. All right, quick reminder. You're going to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or just click the link below in the episode notes. Once you're there, you click support now, enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You'll get this week's recipe for the zucchini noodle caprese, the article, Top Natural Ways to Maintain Strong Bones, and your last chance for this quarter's live one-on-one, just you and me. All right, question 1, and this is a biggie, so I'm starting with it because then I think it helps us, with some of the following questions. So this is, why does weight loss become more difficult after 40? And is there fast weight loss over 40? Let's tackle the fast piece first. There is fast weight loss at any age, provided you don't care how long it lasts or what happens to your health. Most of the time, the things that produce the quote-unquote fast results, right? The number on the scale goes down quickly. That only lasts for a short period of time before the scale starts creeping back up. And there tends to be longer term, I'm hesitating to use this word, but it's true, damage to our metabolic health. Because when we do those things, we lose the weight as water, muscle, and bone and gain it back as fat. Lose it as water, muscle, and bone, gain it back as fat. So by body composition, over time, each time we do that, we are less healthy, less metabolically well, fatter at the same number on the scale, even though we've had these bouts of quote unquote fast weight loss. So everything we're going to talk about is under the assumption that we want our weight management to be fat removal, not loss, right? Because what happens when we lose something? I don't know about you, but I want to find it, right? So this is fat removal. Also, that's long term, right? And with improved health outcomes. So as long as those are your objectives, then we can keep going. And with that said, it is slower, right? It is slower when we do it in a way where it will truly last, where it is fat removal, not weight loss, right? And then, frankly, why it gets more difficult, the answer is estrogen, right? And progesterone a bit too. But long story short, I think, and Christine, I'm curious to hear how you explain it, but I think the most digestible, no pun intended, way to explain it is that estrogen, the presence of estrogen and increased estrogen when we're younger in life, keeps us more insulin sensitive. It keeps us more metabolically fit, basically. It helps with, when we lose that estrogen, we become less insulin sensitive. We also, with the loss of progesterone, end up with sleep challenges. And so it's the balance of the hormones that are important, not just any one hormone, right? We don't want, everything to be at 1,000 all the time, right? Like that's not the goal. It's about balance. But long story short, as we age and as even we have more and more years of our lifestyle kind of taxing our systems, we're a little bit, our liver is a little taxed in terms of its capacity to handle everything, our adrenals and all that kind of stuff. Like everything is connected. But, I think especially from where I sit in this space, blood sugar is, key driver.
I think that the one thing that most people don't realize that they can change and that it matters, because when you're in a funk or you're irritable or you're angry that the line is so long, I think we think that it's our destiny. And a lot of that has to do with estrogen as well. So then you say, well, what can I do about it? What does my mood have to do with my weight? And personally, I think that there's something about that refrigerator when you're in a bad mood, that there's something about just getting something in our mouths and something that feels
Comfort.
good, comfort foods, and that's another piece of the struggle, and also the whole aging thing. I think that there's a lot of personal, work that we can do, but if our hormones are working for us, it actually doesn't happen anymore. Like, you end up feeling pretty good in the morning. You feel like you've had a good night's sleep. Whereas, when estrogen is low and you're feeling, kind of moody and irritable, and, you go to grab a sweet drink or a dessert or something to make yourself feel better, those are other pieces of this. And so, later we'll talk about how to get more estrogen in us, but low estrogen levels for sure affect your mood and your outlook on life.
Yeah, for sure. And then the food and the low outlook on life, right, impacts then this piece of, weight management efforts. So the question is, why does weight management become more difficult after 40? So blood sugar, estrogen, mood, as you talked about, impaired sleep is also a piece of that. If we don't sleep well, if we're not detoxifying well, it's going to be a problem. Also, as we age, it becomes harder to, I'm going to use the word metabolize. It's harder to metabolize the protein that we eat. It's harder to break it down. It's harder for our body to use it. So there's even a piece of, quote unquote, doing all the things, just as we age with our digestive tract, our gut health. Later, sort of post menopause, we typically see a decrease in appetite as well. And so then again, what we eat, when we eat becomes, even of more importance. And then I think the muscle piece, we really can start to lose muscle long before 40. But there is this piece, especially with the decreased estrogen, especially with other, these other variables at play, and less movement and all of these things, we can certainly end up in a place where decreased muscle mass, decreased activity make it increasingly more difficult. And we talked about this in an episode a couple weeks ago, that also the balance of those hormones change where on the body you're carrying that excess weight. And so that's also a piece of what people tend to notice, which I think this kind of leads us into the second question, which is, so question 2, at what age does menopause start? What should I know about changes in my menstrual cycle, fertility, or perimenopause? So it's funny, I've heard it explained where essentially our ovaries burn out, and so estrogen decreases. And of course, that description came from a male doctor. But, by the way, our estrogen isn't going to drop to completely zero overnight, right? It is a decrease over time. And usually it ends up at about 50% of what it once was. There is some research that this can start as early, as late 30s. I have a theory. This is not, I want to preface what I'm about to say. This is my theory. This is not real research backed, but I have a theory that because birth control is essentially medicated menopause, we are now seeing a generation of women having perimenopausal symptoms earlier and earlier because their system has been manipulated for so many years. Mm. I don't know that for a fact. I am, that's me guessing. I think the other piece about your cycle that's probably worth connecting, and this goes to, Christine, what you were saying before about mood, right? We think of the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, but it's also gonadal. or for women, ovarian. And so there is this feedback loop that with stress, it really can disrupt that cycle. With adrenal fatigue, it can really disrupt that cycle. And so it is a piece of understanding and tracking for yourself how long is your follicular phase? How long is your luteal phase, right? And, you have ovulation in the middle there, but starting to get to know what your typical is so that when yours starts to adjust, you can notice what's changing and how it's changing. I'll tell you, like for me, I notice the difference in months where I get better sleep compared to months where, especially different parts of my cycle, I'm not sleeping as much or as well.
Yeah, all that matters. Like, I think people don't understand how I think when people say hormones, they immediately think sex hormones. And
Yes.
so, like, I'm feeling hormonal. That doesn't mean that you're feeling insulin sensitive. You're
Yeah.
thinking of the sex hormones. But what people don't understand is that I'm a dancer, so the dance between the hormones. So what Jen said about the adrenals, and even cortisol, and where you deposit fat, all these different things. There's a dance between them. So like with birth control pills, you're in a state of almost pregnancy the whole time, and so without being pregnant, and so because you've stopped your menstrual cycle, and so like what does that do to the other hormones, and then what burnout do you have from the other hormones? Like what happens to the whole kind of natural flow of things? Now I think once you stop, some of that comes back. And also our lovely fat cells, and as much as we curse them for making it that we can't fit into a bikini, they actually make estrogen after the ovaries stop making estrogen. So we need to be thankful for that 50% that is still there. That's all. And also the fat cells store some of the estrogen from your youth that's available to you when you need it. So, the whole system is complicated in a good way. It's a feedback loop where everything is kind of leaning on this house of cards. And when it's going well, it just is like magic. You're sleeping well, you're in a good mood, you feel strong, you feel vibrant, and then when that house of cards gets a little shaky, then that's when you have to look at all this and say, what can we do to ameliorate some of these negative changes?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point to recognize too. They call it sort of like that estrogen steal of the fat cells. I'm just going back and looking at the question. So what age does menopause start? What should I know about changes in my menstrual cycle, fertility, or perimenopause? So essentially what can happen, in thinking about that cycle is the length of the different phases changes. And in particular, that follicular phase tends to shorten. Ovulation happens more rapidly. And eventually, ovulation isn't happening at all. And if ovulation isn't happening at all, there isn't a need for like a shedding of the lining, I guess. So you'll start to notice if you're using an app or some sort of tool to start to track, what you're noticing. And the apps will help you know what to keep track of. It'll ask you questions and that kind of stuff. You'll see how those cycles change. Even an erratic length cycle can be a sign of perimenopause. So, it may be used to be like 28 days, maybe it's 25 or 22. And then, maybe some months it's 30 and some months it's 22. And so that's sort of all over the place, a little less predictable are some signs that we have this hormonal imbalance. That said, again, this came up a couple weeks ago. It doesn't necessarily, like it's a sign of perimenopause or a symptom of perimenopause. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are. And that's where we can look at some of the other things like our stress, like our sleep, like, all of these other pieces. All right, I think we got that one. Next question. How much protein do I really need after 40? Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
To me, it's also how active you are.
Yes.
So, maybe the 120 grams, 180 grams, and also that's someone who's 150 pounds. So that would be, kind of an average, moderate exercise and stuff. But as some people probably know, when you run marathons and really exercise a lot, you actually lose your period. So then the
Yes.
question is, are you not keeping up with the increased protein needs, So there are ways of doing the math and calculating that. But to me, you can't go wrong because you're not only building muscle mass, which is really important, especially as you age, but guess what's made out of protein? All those neurotransmitters that make you feel good, all those hormones, not all the hormones, some of them are based on fat, but a lot of them are protein based. So now you're feeding the fuel of all the things that are going to make you feel good. So again, if you're the type that's really active, then you can kind of add on more without any fear of overdoing it in terms of protein. You probably should have
Yeah,
protein at every meal, right?
exactly. Every
Hmm.
time you eat, meal or snack, we want protein.
Hmm.
Increasing, the dietary guidelines in the US are changing. But even beyond that, I just heard about a recent meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is when they look at a whole bunch of different studies, right, and try to draw conclusions. And essentially what they said, in particular, for women over 40, we want to aim for a gram of protein for every pound of body weight.
Hmm.
So a gram of protein for every pound of body weight. Now, this is grams, not ounces. A lot of times when we think about protein, we think about it in ounces, right? So unless you're eating all packaged foods where you're reading labels and it's giving you grams, we're going to have to convert this so that we can understand the ounces to grams. So the rule of thumb is 7 grams is like 1 egg white or 1 ounce of a cooked meat or 1 egg, right? Same thing. So that actually tracks to the guidelines that we recommend to people all the time on salad with a side of fries. At every meal for a biologically female body, 4 to 6 ounces, right? So that's 28 to 42 grams at a meal. If you have 3 meals a day, we're hovering around 100, maybe a little more, right? Like if you did 40 at 3 meals, you're at 120 grams. And then snacks are like 2 to 3 ounces, right? So we can add that in there. And lo and behold, you're getting to that guideline without feeling like you're using every bit of your mental capacity to keep track of these grams of protein, right? So 2 to 3 ounces at a snack, 4 to 6 ounces at a meal, and you'll get there. But the aim
Another
is, yeah, go ahead.
Another reason in terms of increasing after 40 is to maintain your muscles and bones actually also
Yes.
it's really important. So so it's very comprehensive in terms of what the reasons are for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. And that leads us actually right into the next question. It's almost like I put these in a logical order. The next question is, how can I maintain muscle and bone health as I age? So the protein we talked about, resistance training, weight bearing exercise. So balance is also really important, and weight bearing. So standing on one foot while you put the groceries away. Standing on one foot while you cook. And by the way, when you stand on one foot, try not to sink into that hip, that you're leaning on so that you're holding yourself upright. Resistance training to maintain and build muscle is so critical. The minerals also are really important. I don't know if we have this question later about what tests to get. I think we do have
Yes.
this question
Yes.
later. But specifically on the bone health piece, also get a REM scan, not just the bone density test. But it's the nutrients, protein, minerals, and vitamins the resistance training, the balance, the weight-bearing exercise. Christine, what am I forgetting?
Just to let people know that the swimmers out there, you're getting a little bit of resistance with the water, but you're not getting that weight bearing. We're really talking about like walking, jogging, climbing stairs, things like that, just to note the difference of it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I have a client in his 70s, and he is a big swimmer.
Yeah.
And, even for him with the bones, it's an interesting thing. So, All right. Next question, moving right along. How can I balance my hormones naturally to support weight loss and energy? Also with this question, how do I adapt my diet to changing metabolism and hormonal shifts in midlife? So it's funny, it's all the same recommendations that we say all the time. Protein, fiber, quality fat. Dare I go an episode without saying protein and fiber at every meal makes removing fat no big deal, right? The thing that happens with this phase of life, when we have this added challenge of our hormones, right? With less estrogen and progesterone and, impaired sleep and all of these things, we actually have less room for flexibility. We have to have a bit of a greater commitment to fewer grains, less sugar, fewer refined carbs, eliminating those processed foods. The exercise, the quality fat and fiber from vegetables and fruit, as opposed to from grains and starches. Sleep, stress, all of those pieces become increasingly more important. Every piece. It's just that we have less wiggle room, right? That estrogen was our cushion. And when you eliminate the cushion, we've got less wiggle room. There was actually an interesting study about dairy that the study basically suggests that reducing how much dairy you're eating may be beneficial, that essentially there's an association between eating cream and yogurt and missing ovulation. So if that matters to you, if you are, looking to stay fertile, maybe that's something you want to look at. I think the biggest piece with all of this, right? Energy follows blood sugar and sleep and stress. The weight management efforts follow all of these pieces, and these hormonal shifts. Like I said, I think the best way to think about it is just that decreased estrogen kind of removes that padding, that cushion that gives us the space for more flexibility.
And also you want to talk about phytoestrogens because they're, a lot of people get the advice to not have any foods that have an estrogenic effect because they're worried about breast cancer and ovarian cancer, and that if your estrogen levels are so high that you might be causing damage in that direction. We've been talking mostly about low estrogen levels. So what people need to know is that when something like wild yam, let's say, or black cohosh, things that people recommend for menopause, that the reaction when they bind to the estrogen site is so mild. So it is giving you some relief from hot flashes and some of the things that are menopause symptoms, which I think we still are going to be talking about. But it doesn't do the high estrogen negativity that people are afraid of in terms of stimulate. It actually blocks any kind of estrogen in your body that has not been broken down properly. There are types of estrogen in your body that are only partially broken down, and they actually cause inflammation and cause weight gain and cause some of these negative effects. So when you have these very mild nutrients that you can actually just, eat in your vegetables, and they have a mild estrogenic effect, they're actually blocking some of we used to call them flamethrowers in school because they had such a powerful negative effect on the body. And when you say hot flashes, where do they come from? Some of that's from these partially broken down estrogen that are not the good ones. You really want estrogen to be fully broken down and excreted by the end of the process. So, hopefully that's what we're all doing by our healthy lifestyles.
Yeah, I think what you just brought up is a really good point with phytoestrogens, and also understanding that I think over the years they've really been demonized. And there is a purpose that they can serve, and really understanding, the entire process of estrogen in the body and sort of breaking it down and getting it out of our system. So I think that brings us to question 6. How does gut health affect weight management and mood? And I'm hesitating because this could be an entire episode. We have many episodes on gut health. We have many episodes on, weight management and mood. But bottom line, your gut is responsible for nutrient absorption. Your gut is responsible for communicating all over the body. We've also heard a lot of serotonin is made in the gut. The vagus nerve is the literal connection between the gut and the brain. So there are tons of connections between these pieces. And my brain is sort of going in 7 directions of what to talk about first. So I do think, as we're on this estrogen piece, so drops in estrogen tell the sympathetic nervous system to generate heat. That also creates these hot flashes, right? Activating the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest, as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system, that's your fight or flight creating the heat, right? So parasympathetic nervous system, the vagus nerve, deep breathing, humming. It's called the Valsalva maneuver. That's the one where, if your ears were plugged from the airplane and you sort of plug your nose and close your mouth and blow out a little bit, human connection is another one. Touch is another one for the vagus nerve. Christine, you love the vagus nerve. What should we talk about with the vagus nerve?
Yeah. No, it's called the wanderer because it goes all throughout your body in terms of receiving a lot of messages to the brain too, in terms of your gut health. So if we can, what we call tonify the vagus nerve, then the messages get through easier and there's a better communication rather than having a lot of static on the line. That's what I would kind of describe it, when the vagus nerve is not really, getting the feedback, and also that you recognize it. That's this mindfulness piece too that we haven't really talked about. It's like, when you eat, what are you thinking about? Are you appreciating the food? Did you spend some time preparing the food? What are the smells? All that. The vagus nerve is very involved in all that and receiving those messages. So the more calm we can be when we're eating, and maybe slow and tasting and all those things that they seem to do more in Europe. I don't know, here we're always rushing around so much. Like if it takes 2 hours to have your lunch over there, it tells you something. They're tasting all the different foods and, so that's something I think we can cultivate ourselves, in terms of our gut health. Is like, how do you eat? And also the time of day. We haven't talked about that, that if you tend to eat your larger meals earlier in the day, it gives you a chance to digest and get some of those nutrients into you. If you eat and then right before bed just fall out, there's kind of a sludge that's created. So you want to be able to turn those nutrients into useful building blocks for your body.
Absolutely. I was, as you were saying all of that, I was like, again, it leads right into our next question about sleep and stuff like that. But before we do that, I think prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic. So prebiotic is your fiber. That is the food for the gut bugs. So our vegetables, our protein. By the way, it's all the rage with GLP-1s. Inulin is a fiber that will naturally increase your own GLP-1. Probiotics are those healthy gut bacteria. And postbiotic is like butyrate and short chain fatty acids. So we want to have all elements covered, and they are critical for every piece of this question, with, the weight management piece and the mood piece. It's so intimately connected. And Christine, you were talking before about protein. The building blocks of protein are also the building blocks of the neurotransmitters that help us feel good. So again, are we not able to break down the protein that we're eating? Are we eating enough protein so that our body can build those neurotransmitters, right? Like, everything is connected. I hope that what you're hearing by so many of these answers repeating is that it really comes down to a couple things that we're going to do, over and over with great consistency. All right,
Also,
so oh yeah.
I just want to go back to the flamethrowers, that the fiber is what helps that metabolism of estrogen to be completely broken down properly and excreted. So if you want to avoid the flamethrowers, you can eat more fiber, eat more vegetables, and the crucifers, the different crucifers, the broccolis and the cauliflowers and that too, help the metabolism of estrogen. So it's like you said, we're repeating ourselves, but for different reasons.
Yeah. And so the next question is, how do I improve my sleep quality, manage fatigue, and brain fog? So the fatigue and brain fog are certainly connected to the sleep. So I get why this person is asking all of these, connected. Christine, what you said about meal timing is tremendous, right? Rule of thumb, the later you eat, the lighter you eat. I also recommend, especially at this phase of life, finishing food 3 to 4 hours before bed. Having a sleep schedule. So going to bed at the same time every night, waking up at the same time every morning. Making that easier is focusing on the morning. So if you start to wake up at the same time every day, your bedtime will fall into place. Morning routine with first morning light to your eyes and having no caffeine before food. So caffeine with food, okay, not before. Evening routine, getting rid of the light, especially the blue light, reducing our stress. Drinking enough water. Back on the caffeine thing, be careful with caffeine or stimulants anytime after the morning. What am I forgetting? B vitamins.
Temperature.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go ahead.
To have a cool room, especially if we're talking about hot flashes here with menopause or with perimenopause, that, keeping the room cool. You still might get the flash, but it'll pass faster, and then you'll like, if it woke you up, you'll be able to go back to sleep pretty fast. So. And this is me. If I feel like I'm burning hot, either because of the weather or because of the food that I've had late or whatever, I'll jump in a cold shower right in the middle of the night, and I barely remember falling asleep again because it's so instant, and you realize that you start associating your body temperature with your ability to sleep.
Yeah. I mean, even doing that before bed, right, as part of your sort of wind down could be helpful. And exercise, right? That exercise helps with the sleep quality. And during the day, that movement with blood flow can help with the energy, the fatigue, the brain fog. So again, a couple things, a lot of bang for the buck. I mentioned B vitamins. Stress eats up our B vitamins. A lot of times when you're like, where are my keys? Where's my phone? Where are my glasses? Right? Why did I walk in this room? It's B vitamins. So B vitamins. I'll say it again. Anything else on sleep quality, fatigue, brain fog?
The length of sleep, so between 7 and 9 hours, is kind of what's recommended. There are genetically people who can do with less, and there are lifestyle things that people need more. So to me, no sin to take a nap during the day. That's another, like, if for some reason you ended up with 7 hours of sleep and you really needed 9, and then you take an hour nap in the afternoon, that's okay too. So each person, and don't compare yourself to anybody else. We are so individual with this. It's sort of like the effects of caffeine. We're very individual. I know people who can have a double espresso at night and go to sleep, right after. That's their metabolism. That's not luck. That's just their metabolism. So don't try to imitate people.
And by the way, their metabolism with caffeine, not necessarily their
right.
metabolism with,
That's right.
you
That's
know.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. So we're about halfway through. Let's pause here to highlight our partner for this episode. And then we have questions more on managing hot flashes and other symptoms, more on supplements, tests, and then skincare stuff too. So, all right, hang tight. We're going to be back. Big thanks to Snap Cleaning Products for supporting Salad with a Side of Fries. Make household and industrial cleaning a snap with their eco-friendly, economical, multi-purpose Snap products. Snap's concentrated, multi-purpose formulas perform light to industrial strength jobs all in one bottle. Snap products give you the cleaning power of a variety of cleaners, saving you time, money, and valuable storage space. And Snap products were developed with the environment in mind, using plant-based ingredients that are biodegradable, phosphate-free, non-toxic, and bottom recyclable containers. So as we age and our detoxification pathways are less efficient, we'll say, they're a little more taxed, you might be looking for cleaner, non-toxic, yet still effective home cleaning products. Snap is that for me. The products are safe and powerful because they're made of enzymes, so they actually break down organic stains and materials to remove them. The triple enzyme laundry detergent is just $13.95 for 40 ounces and does up to 80 loads of laundry. It's truly free of chemicals and additives. The dish soap I love, $11.95 for 32 ounces. Or maybe you're ready to upgrade your whole household cleaning products in one fell swoop with the Snap Pack for just $89.95. Of course, all these prices are before your discount for being a Salad with a Side of Fries listener. So you get 10% off and free shipping. Simply text the word CLEAN, CLEAN, to 844-947-4846. You'll receive the link and coupon code right to your phone. Again, simply text the word CLEAN, CLEAN, to 844-947-4846 to try Snap. In particular, I love the dishwashing soap, $11.95, 32 ounces. And of course, that's before 10% off and free shipping. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. Okay, next question on our list. What are the signs and best treatments for menopausal symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats? So we kind of talked about night sweats already. Further to that, my brain is going to all the fiber-rich foods, right? So, more berries. We'll talk more about some of this stuff with some supplementation too. But even thinking of like vasodilators, right? Better circulation. Dressing in layers seems like a silly thing to say, but it helps. Exercise, not smoking, reducing alcohol consumption, reducing your caffeine, reducing your sugar, and even reducing spicy foods. Some of those things can help. And of course, we mentioned this before, but I think experimenting or playing with some of the phytoestrogenic foods and seeing how you feel. Like they might really help to have, edamame and organic tofu and, black cohosh we'll talk about with supplements and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can do different kinds of seeds and berries and fruits and things like that in Chinese medicine, that they put a lot of attention on hot and cold, and which foods create heat in your body and which foods create cold in your body. And you'd think you don't need both. Yes, you do. You need to, if you yourself are burning hot, like have a lot of inflammation and stuff, you want foods that will cool you. And the opposite, if you're always cold, you want foods that'll warm you up, so all of those things come into play. So when we're talking about hot flashes, we're kind of going towards the foods that are more cooling. That's why the spicy foods, may not be the best choice.
Excellent. All right, moving right along with supplements. So should I be taking supplements? If so, which ones are most important for women in midlife? I'm a big fan of supplementation. With that said, I always like to remind everybody we cannot supplement our way out of poor nutrition. We cannot supplement our way out of poor lifestyle choices. With that said, then, supplementation can be really helpful. I'm a big fan of, a high-quality multivitamin to start to fill in the gaps where our nutrition choices fall short, where our food supply falls short, places where you might want to have an increased commitment. Omega-3s, some of that quality fat vitamin D. So a deficiency in vitamin D can actually worsen the menopausal, perimenopausal symptoms. Going back to the hot flashes thing and circulation and vasodilation and all of that, magnesium, also head comfort. And I mean, magnesium does so many things in the body, but there is research that magnesium may reduce frequency and intensity of hot flashes. I'm a big fan of adaptogenic herbs for stress. So ashwagandha, black cohosh. There is some research around black cohosh with hot flashes specifically. And, as with all supplements, quality matters. Anytime we talk about supplements, we want to think about two things. So bioavailability is sort of the quality of the ingredient itself. And then bioactivity is sort of the quality of the formula, right? So does it have all the pieces in place for it to do in the body what we want it to do, right? So when you're looking for supplementation as a tool, it makes the argument for working with somebody who has some experience in this space so that you know what you're getting, somebody who you can ask questions of or can give you questions to ask your other providers, things like that, so that, because it's a whole can of worms, we'll say. Christine, what other supplements do you like?
Well, because I was trained in Chinese medicine, Dong Quai is one of the ones that they use a lot for all the symptoms, body aches, hot flashes, all the different symptoms of menopause. Moisturizing, we haven't talked about that, you really can get dried out when you don't have estrogen, and that can be in all different places. So vaginal dryness and skin dryness. So Dong Quai is great. If you don't know what that is, that's angelica, and it's the root of the Angelica sinensis plant. And then also Vitex, which is chasteberry. We studied all this in acupuncture school in terms of, just like in Chinese medicine, there's nothing disease related at all when it comes to menopause or perimenopause, right? And it's just a matter of finding that balance that we were talking about before between all the different hormones. So these herbs are to get the balance back again, so that you're able to just kind of decrease the symptoms enough to have a pleasant life, to not wake up in the middle of the night and all the things that are just annoyances more than anything else. And again, try and get that mood so that your outlook is more cheery and looking forward to the each day, that kind of thing. So that's what the herbs do. The soy isoflavones are also really good for this, because again, what I said before about that mild estrogenic effect without being putting you into excess when you have those negative side effects. So these are just mild recommendations to help out.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned there. Like, soy isoflavones are very different than what we typically think of,
Tofu.
Right. So, all right. What are the most common health risks for women in their late 30s and 40s, and how can I prevent them? What tests do I want to get? In my world, what I see the most and what tends to increase, late 30s and 40s and on, is increased LDL and triglycerides, increased blood sugar and insulin resistance, decreased bone density. So with that, right, what are the tests that we want to get? We want to get, a complete lipid panel. We want to know our cholesterol ratio, right? We have a lot of episodes on heart health that you can go back to, but focusing, heart health, blood sugar, a full metabolic panel that's going to give you your A1C and your fasting glucose. And then with the bone density scan, yes, and a REM scan, because a bone density scan has some drawbacks, right? It's not just bone density, but also bone flexibility, right? So there's pieces of what we want there. And of course, getting information on, your hormone levels. I think sometimes the guessing can be the most frustrating part. So if we test instead of guess, it can help us, see what's happening with all of our efforts too, right? So if we test and then add some of these lifestyle choices and supplements, and then, give it some time, and then test again. And let's see if we're moving in the direction that we want to. What else,
Yeah,
Christine?
also estrogen itself. So there are three different kinds
Yeah.
of estrogen, and so one type is really before menopause, and you just don't want to be estrogen dominant. You want to make sure that the other, like the progesterone and the other hormones, are in balance with the estrogen. So it's pretty easy for the doctor to test all three, in terms of what kinds of estrogen you have. And again, this breakdown of the estrogen after it's been used, like get it out of your body. So it's just a blood test that they do for that.
Yeah. And to that point, too, I mean, I've even heard people with like progesterone creams and
Yes.
having infinitely better sleep, right? So there's a lot of tools in the toolbox here. I'll share with everybody. I'm looking for a bioidentical hormone expert to talk to for us. So it's on my list. I'm looking for somebody where I'm like, yes, this person. So,
And
when I find
that's
them, you'll know. Yeah.
not Suzanne Summers. Well, because she's not. I think she died finally, but she wrote a book about bioidentical hormones. And the thing that struck me about that is that you really do need someone to guide you, because they're going to end up testing you. It's a very difficult thing to get the right balance. So it's
Right.
not that they're better or worse. It's just really unstable. The whole system of adding bioidentical is unstable. So from month to month, you have to get tested. So whoever you're going to, just make sure that they don't just send you off with a package and say, see you in 6 months. It really should be that, because you don't want to overdo or underdo.
Yeah. All right. And then now we're in a few, skincare questions. So which ingredients, retinol, vitamin C, hyaluronic acid, are most effective for aging skin? So I'll talk about some of these, but fundamentally, hydration, right? A lot of times we think what causes acne is, too much oil. And so we spend a lot of our lives trying to dry out the skin, which in reality, by the way, dry skin has the skin then producing more sebum, which is that oil. And that's what creates, the blemish. That's not the same as hydration. Dehydration tends to create wrinkles, or what we notice as wrinkles. And certainly our hormones play into the appearance of our skin. So, Christine, you were talking about, low estrogen drying out the skin. 1,000%. We want to focus on hydration. Also, it is a postmenopausal sign to have those little vertical lines around the mouth, around the lips. So, now you're going to go around staring at everybody's lips. But so vitamin C is an interesting one for dark spots and brightening. It can also help a bit with fine lines and wrinkles. It can help the skin feel firmer, more supple, smoother, again, a brighter complexion. Yes, retinol. So retinol is kind of like the precursor to vitamin A. And it's believed, what the research shows is that it accelerates the cell turnover in the skin. So accelerated cell turnover then helps liven the skin's like surface layers, right? So we're getting rid of those dead skin cells. You'll see retinol products all over. There are different types of retinol. I use one, or I like one. The ingredient is called Polypore 120RE, and it's the delivery system for sustained release for the retinol. So that, because be careful with the sun with retinol, and so that sustained release also helps it be a little bit less irritable, right? It helps it be a little more stable and a little less reactionary with the skin. Still, be careful with the sun. Hyaluronic acid is in a lot of skincare products and a lot of ingredients. It is a vital moisturizer and a lubricant. You want to make sure that any skincare product using hyaluronic acid is using one where it has sort of been, I don't know what the right word is, but essentially like using a delivery system that helps it penetrate the skin because it's a large molecule essentially. So if it's going to be effective, it has to get in there, right? And so this leads us into how should I adjust my skincare routine as I enter my 40s? And this is a little bit, I'll admit, this is a little difficult to answer because adjusting it sort of by definition means that without knowing what you're doing now, it's hard to say what to adjust, right? As general guidelines, just like with our food and our nutrition, we have less wiggle room. I think it's the same thing with our skincare, right? We probably need to be a bit more religious about it. Morning and evening, not wearing makeup to bed, more hydration, as we talked about. This is when you might want to add more serum. So a skincare process is cleanse, tone, treat, moisturize, and in the morning add SPF. So you might need a different cleanser, right? Then a milkier cleanser that doesn't sud, doesn't create bubbles, can be really a lot more hydrating. That what they use in the skincare to create the suds has a drying effect on the skin. So maybe a milkier cleanser. Definitely using a toner so that your skin will better absorb those serums and the moisturizers. If you're using multiple serums, you're going to start with the lighter one. Go lightest to heaviest. So lighter, runnier versus the thicker ones is sort of how that goes, like just in the texture of what it's like. And then, of course, your hydration, your moisturizer. Maybe you want to do some of those masks, once or twice a week. And then gua sha is like this facial massage. You can look online for different, instructions for how to do gua sha. You can use kind of the back of your knuckles. There's also devices that you can buy, and it's essentially, like I said, a facial massage. And there was some research that doing gua sha once a week for 8 weeks, women saw improved menopause symptoms like hot flashes, sleep issues, and mood changes. So, more research, yes. But, there's also a bit of that that's kind of detoxifying, Caveat to that is if you've had Botox within the last month, don't do gua sha. So give it some time after you have Botox. Next question, how can I reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and age spots? So we talked about this already. Age spots, the vitamin C, some of those brightening serums, the fine lines and wrinkles, there's, the retinols. I use one that has an ingredient called Liftenin Express that's a polysaccharide kind of base, but it actually has firming qualities. There's also red algae extract in it, and so it's like almost a tightening effect within a few minutes. Squalene is another hydrating ingredient to look for. So again, it's all about the hydration, the brightening, the antioxidants. We also lose collagen and elasticity. So, thinking about those ingredients topically and ingested too. And then there's a lot of skincare products that also have caffeine. So you can, especially for the under eye, there's a lot with a little topical caffeine that can help. And then, all right, last one, bring it in for a landing. Does retinol really work for aging skin? We talked about this already. Short answer is yes. A little bit of research that I found, retinoids reduce fine lines and wrinkles by increasing the production of collagen. So what we were just saying. They also stimulate the production, apparently, of new blood vessels in the skin, which can then improve skin color. It may help with age spots, depending on, there's some less convincing research, but interesting. The piece to recognize is that it takes time. So it's like 3 to 6 months of regular use to really see those improvements in wrinkles. So best results 6 to 12 months or, obviously ongoing. And certainly pairing a retinol with quality moisturizers, sun protection, all of that stuff. Whoa, Christine, we did it. Final thought?
I really like the collagen and also taking it internally. I mix it in with my smoothie in the morning. And then this NAD+, that's another one that helps with skin. And you've probably heard, I've heard it in ads in the media and stuff, and they're talking about, if a cell is ready to die, the NAD+ pushes it over the edge in a way, so you're not dealing with all these cells that are like, kind of not functioning anymore, but they're still sitting there. So that's also for skin health. You want to be able to get rid of those cells and the NAD+. If the cell is going to be able to be saved, it also does that. So it makes healthy cells healthy, but then the cells that are ready to keel over, it just kind of pushes them out the door, So.
Yeah, we have a nutrition nugget on NAD. So
okay, there you go.
Yeah, I can't remember if we called it NAD or NAD+, but it's there. So you guys can go. Yeah. Awesome. Any final thought to wrap this up with all of our questions from women over 40 on the internet?
I think the lifestyle thing is really key. It's like it's not just one thing. If you just did one thing, but then on the other hand, starting with one thing is probably the way to go. So to say, okay, for a week, I'm going to start with this one thing that they mentioned and then kind of build from there, add another thing, and by the time you've hit the month mark, you've got 4 new things that you're doing, and hopefully they're not too prohibitive that you would be able to fit them into your life. And but it is about lifestyle.
Yeah. And I guess like a final thought from me is everything we said was pretty general, right? Like while there are guidelines and recommendations, it's still general and you want to personalize it. And so it does mean asking more questions, maybe working with a trusted guide so that this feels less confusing and you can help, easier navigate what adjustments you might want to make for you. And like we said over and over, it's a few things repeated all the time that really impact everything. Yeah. Awesome. All right. As a preview, on Friday in this week's Nutrition Nugget bite-sized bonus episode, we're talking about sunglasses. So June 27th is the day this Nutrition Nugget goes live, is National Sunglasses Day. So we're going to talk about them, right? Does it really matter if we wear them? Does it matter how dark the lenses are? I am all for choosing things for fashion. I do it all the time, but it might matter. So we're going to talk all about it on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode. Be sure wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button, and then your app will alert you when the Nutrition Nugget is live on Friday. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I am at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message, send your ideas, your takeaways, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Christine, thank you again for being here.
Yeah, it was great. I hope the audience enjoyed it. Yeah.
Me too. And friends, if you're not already, join our membership program by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideofries. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and of course, your health, most importantly. You'll get this week's recipe for the zucchini noodle caprese, the article from Dr. John Neustadt, friend of the pod, top natural ways to maintain strong bones, and your last chance for this quarter's live Q&A, which is a one-on-one, just you and me. So until next week, remember, whether you're post-menopause or in perimenopause, aren't sure or aren't yet, but will be one day, know that you're not doomed. We can work with our bodies at any age to improve our health, and the earlier we start, the better. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it and you are worth it. Happy healthy.